What's up, everybody? Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. So, when people think of live action Supergirl, one name immediately comes to my mind specifically, and I loved this woman when she first was announced, when I first saw her in the suit, and when I first saw her play the character. And that woman is Melissa Benoist. For 6 straight seasons, she carried the cape. 6 seasons, which means she played Supergirl for about 126 episodes, and in fact inspired a generation of fans and proved that Supergirl could lead her own television series. And today, I kind of want to look back at that, at least the portrayal, not the show as a whole, because 6 seasons is crazy, and I really don't want to rewatch 6 seasons of that show. Like, I like the show, but I don't want to rewatch it. I don't like it's the same thing with like Flash and Arrow. Like, I don't rewatch those. Like, I like them, but you know, they are, but they are. But I'm just like, the legacy of the show is actually still kind of holds up, and like as like a solid Supergirl representation. Now, the series premiered back in 2015, and I remember just being a few years out of high school at the time, and with a challenge, it could Supergirl carry her own show, and at the time, Superman hadn't really had a show since Smallville, hadn't had an animated show since the animated series. Man of Steel had just popped off. BVS was the next year over. Arrow and Flash had taken off. You know what I mean? Like, Supergirl had a lot going, kind of against it, because it was like the one show helmed by a woman, and it was also Supergirl who was the bomb.com, in my opinion. But it was a bit of a risk. Let's be honest, it was a bit of a risk. And this Supergirl was also supposed to be in the same universe with Arrow and Flash and them, so it was just kind of like, we'll see. And they had Supergirl without Superman, and you know how that use tends to cause issues for whatever reason. But it was at the time, she had Superman. He was still considered DC's biggest hero. Batman dominated the films, and like I said, the Arrowverse. And many people questioned whether she could headline her own series, and she answered that question pretty fast when she first popped onto the show. Now, in my opinion, the thing that made her Supergirl very special was that she had the optimism. She had that very girlish, girl next door charm, optimism that we all like to see in characters like Supergirl, which is something that they're known for. And she captured the hope aspect of Supergirl perfectly. She was just so good at just feeling like she could inspire the hopefulness in people, because Supergirl can do what Superman does, just not to the same extent. And unlike the DCEU or even this version we're about to get this weekend, she genuinely wanted to help people. Like, she became Supergirl because she wanted to help people. She didn't let the loss of Krypton really damage her. She wasn't, an experimented on by the government, and then a little pissed off. Like, she was the Supergirl to Superman. She is probably the stereotype of girl Superman, but you liked it because Melissa Benoist did it so well. And she smiled a lot. She was inspired. She inspired you. She believed people deserve saving. She just had that foundation part of Supergirl down perfectly. The smile, the cheeriness, the voice, even just her overall look, just like the way she was presented. I loved the fact that she was able to just put on the optimism. She could be human. We all know she could be human because she had her sister, and she hung out with Jimmy, and things like that. I kind of love the fact that Shyler Lee is actually related to Christopher Kamen Lee, the guy who played Andros. I thought it was a joke, but then I was like, oh no, they're actually related. Holy crap. So that's pretty cool. But I wasn't a big fan of like the Kara Danvers thing. I know that's like a thing that can happen sometimes in the comics. I just kind of was like, okay, they kind of leaned a little too hard into the girl Clark. She's also a reporter, and she worked for Calista Flockhart for a season, and she did something else, and she was all these things. I just wasn't too big. Like, when I say girl Clark, I mean character wise, but the fact that she was just also a reporter is kind of like, okay, well, now you really made her girl Clark. But I digress on that one. And I do think what's weirdly enough is her relationship with her sister, which I was going to get into, is actually one of the show's biggest things. Like, her and Alex, that's her name, Alex. Okay, I couldn't remember. I got it out though. Figured it out. We're moving. they were like an emotional center of the show. You know, their disagreements, their love for each other, the saving of each other, always having each other's backs, the sisterhood behind it all. That kind of gave character. That kind of gave character to Kara, and it also kind of gave her something to fight for, which is interesting. You know, Superman usually has to fight for Lois and Jimmy and the Daily Planet and sometimes the Kent parents and things like that, and humanity. And Supergirl always kind of felt like she just kind of had to protect what Clark was protecting, but in this show she had her own thing, and that was nice. And it is a good sibling relationship, like probably one of the best in television. You know what I mean? So let's look at it like that. Now, some of the best parts of her in this series was I think they introduced her very well. I think one of my favorite scenes in any of the CW shows to this day was when she was like working on the suit, and she came out and she had like the I want to say draws, but she had like the draws, and she was like no. And she had on the pants. She was like, maybe. And then she had the dress, and she was like, perfect. And she's like wearing a dress, and I was like, this is wonderful. By the way, when they showed a promotional picture of her, I was so happy. I was just like, the suit is perfect. I think her suit just looked so perfect and also looked very good for the CW tone that they were going for. So I was very happy about that. I think that another great part about the show was John Cryer's Lex Luthor. Like, I was like, Alan from Two and a Half Men is going to be Lex Luthor? We'll see. But then he pulled up, and I was like, you know what? My man. All right, you did this, John. Okay, boy. Like, you was really that man on this. Like, he was really legit. Like, in the crossovers, in the Supergirl episode, John Cryer showed up and showed out. We got to give him that one. Y'all can't take that from the man. He really did. And he was honestly one of the better versions in that universe. I thought the Hank Henshaw Martian Manhunter thing was a little jarring at first because when I saw Hank Henshaw, I immediately thought that they were going to do Cyborg Superman. And I was like, okay, they're going to do Cyborg Superman. It's going to be cool. And they can do it on a show because it doesn't really affect an overall narrative that much. And then he ended up being Martian Manhunter. And I was like, oh. I was like, oh, what is it with them and like hiding Martian Manhunter all the time? Like they did it with the Snyderverse, they did it here. I was like, man, they really love having that surprise. I'm John Jones, like a lot. I mean, it's easy to do it because it's a Martian, shape shifting and everything. And I will say he didn't look completely ridiculous at times. Like there was times where I'd see him and I'd be like, yo, he actually looks really good. Like he looks well done for what we were getting. And I think it was a nice relationship to have her be like a mentee to him, but he's also a friend and a father figure to her. And I think that worked well for the show. I mean, like they didn't have. I know it's a terrific shows up at some point. I don't know if it's here, but I know he does show up at some point. And also, something I thought was great was having her cross over into the Arrowverse the way she did. So the first time was they had Flash kind of run into her dimension and they get along so well, and I'm like, I love this so much. These two are so good together actually. And then they finally had her cross over to the Arrow crossovers, and the first thing Ali is kind of a dick to her, and I'm just like, you know what, I kind of want to kill you right now. But he softens up and treats her better. Yeah, when you treat this character bad and you want to punch the other character in the face, that shows a lot. That means you really like that character. I really like her Supergirl actually. And I think one of the things I like was they didn't show Superman immediately. They waited till the next season over, and we get one of the best versions of Superman I've ever seen with Tyler Hoechlin. And he shows up, and he felt so much like animated Superman, but like with his own like modern twist. And I really like that too. So they gave us a really good Supergirl and a really good introduction to a really good Superman who would move on to get his own really good show. So that right there is enough to be like, whew, okay, cool. Now, let's say, all in all, she is my biggest praise for this video. She's my biggest praise, and she is just so fun. She was so enjoyable, so bubbly, so just out there. And I just really love that Melissa seemed to understand that Supergirl is not Superman. She was very able to make them differentiate from each other. She was a lot more expressive, a lot more emotional, more openly compassionate, and she made Kara feel approachable. Not that David Corenswet doesn't do a great job with that with his Superman, and same thing with Tyler Hoechlin's Superman. But I'm saying like she didn't go into this being girl Superman. She went into this being a completely different version from Superman and a completely very I want to say original comic book type Supergirl, which is something I didn't think I would see in the modern day. I felt like they always try to shoot for something new with Supergirl, and they didn't. They went for the old girl next door, bubbly Clark's cousin, but she's doing her own thing, so she does get her little twist. But it didn't feel bad. Now, I would argue that Melissa Benoist's legacy as Supergirl is solid. I think it'll stand the test of time. I think she's going to be one of those performances cast superheroes that people are going to look back on and say like, "Wow, she really was legit." And I think it's just that she was able to prove Supergirl could stand by herself. She was able to prove that by running a 6 episode show, a 6 season, 126 episode show about Supergirl, who tends to be Superman's cousin most of the time without her own thing. Now, a lot of shows have tried to move her out of Superman's shadow, like before mentioned, my Justice League Unlimited analysis has done that. This show, it seems like they're doing the same thing with Supergirl this weekend. There's a lot going on. And she was just Supergirl. That's what she did. She was just Supergirl. There was never a time where it's like, oh, look, that's Superman's cousin. No, they always went, oh, look, that's Supergirl. And she always managed to bring that energy that I like to see in a protagonist that I really love. And that's something that I think she did. She was able to change how fans viewed Supergirl. And that was not easy. So I would say that Melissa Benoist's legacy of Supergirl is pretty much locked in. It's pretty much locked in. She's good. We all good. Now, no adaptation is ever really perfect. Unless you really just think animated series Batman and animated series Superman are perfect, then I would shake your hand on that. But the CW series had a lot of its ups and downs when it came to the show. Let's just be honest here. But Melissa Benoist consistently delivered a heartfelt, hopeful, and inspiring portrayal of Kara Danvers. So, for an entire generation of fans, she wasn't just playing Supergirl, she really was Supergirl. Like, if we're gonna keep it up, if we're gonna keep it 100, she really introduced an entire generation of people to even the character. Because if you were too young to remember Justice League Unlimited, that means you probably weren't even born when Superman was on television, the animated series, and you just didn't get a lot of exposure to Supergirl. Now, something that is crazy is that Supergirl was supposed to be in Legion of Superheroes, but season 3 didn't happen. So, and then so when you see Supergirl on television and you were a fan of Arrow and you like The Flash and you see Supergirl, she really was a lot of people's first interaction or experience with Supergirl. It's crazy to think about it, but it's true. It's very true. Now, it is something to think about is every generation has like its own Supergirl, right? For some, it's the DCAU Kara, which would probably be my Supergirl. She was like my first experience with Supergirl was animated series and Justice League, and for my mom's generation, it'd probably be Helen Slater. And some people even connect with Sasha Kaye Supergirl because it was a brief but memorable appearance and performance. Usually, when people talk about the Flash, they mention Supergirl. And fewer fans may know Kara from My Adventures with Superman, but I think people would enjoy that version of her. But for a lot of people around the world, Melissa Benoist really defined Supergirl for like 6 straight years. And that is like a legacy that deserves to be respected. that deserves to be celebrated. And I personally think that she's responsible for why the Supergirl blow up really kind of happened. Because think about Sasha Kaye, Supergirl was a few years after her show ended, and then you had this Supergirl coming out, and it's the second movie in the DC universe. You get in the movie before Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Green Lantern. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it really does. It really does go that way. I would say that. Yeah, that's how I'm going to end the show. I'm going to end it with that because I would love to see people's opinions on this down below. Like, comment, and subscribe as I aforementioned. I will see you on the next one.